Hello, I'm back. Penny here with a focus on something that is not watch related, but it is watch related, right? This is going to be a little bit of a migration into my psyche, which, kind of makes sense because watch collecting is such an emotional and psychological hobby for so many. So today's topic I want to talk about is watch collecting contentment. Is that possible? Why is it so hard to be content with our watches? And for demonstration here, I have some books that I'm going to say a little bit about in a second, but I also have two of my favorite watches. I would say these are my two favorite watches, but I don't think they are. I think the Speedmaster and my Explorer 2 are my favorite two watches. Or at least they're the watches that I've worn the most and have like the strongest emotional attachment to. But the sub is coming up in the world. The sub is definitely getting my attention these days, and I've been enjoying it despite this very big class, which is my only thing. Well, I don't like the 21 millimeter bracelet. It does feel a little bit big, though it has a nice taper. This is not supposed to be a review of this. And the clasp. Despite all of these features, this is a good watch. I've been enjoying it, and I love my Speedmaster. So these two watches alone, I have them here for demonstration because I'm wearing them interchangeably for the month of June. And these two watches alone are a fantastic two-piece collection. And you would think that I could be, as a collector, very, very, very pleased and content with just these two watches. To some extent they're like modest luxury watches. I mean, it's all subjective, but these could actually be two very satisfying pieces. So why is it then that it is so hard for me to have what I would consider true watch collecting contentment? Okay, well, I think so many of us would say you are always thinking about the next watch. You buy a watch, buy the Royal Oak. In this year of 2021, I have purchased 3 pretty substantial pieces, and I am constantly researching more watches, constantly imagining what will round out my collection, and often I find myself almost being obsessed about what the next watch is going to be, despite just recently having added this and a few other watches, right? So a lot of people will say that you're constantly craving the next hit. You're constantly craving the next purchase, the next watch. As soon as one watch comes in, you're looking for the next one. It certainly has a lot of things in common with an addiction or an obsessiveness, etc. And I'm not going to dive too far down that road, but I think that some of those things have to do with why it's so hard to feel content in this hobby. I more want to talk about how can we try to be more content and really feel that is meaningful. Like, not just say, I'm going to enjoy my watches. I'm going to enjoy these 2 beautiful watches and not worry about the next watch or what I am going to get at some point or selling it or whatever. Just how do we do it? And, is more than the why, I guess. That's what I want to emphasize here today. How? I think you do have to get to the why a little bit. And I will say this. A lot of us watch collectors are intellectual people. We are people that I think what we have in common, it can't generalize too much here, but I think because you're always researching, because there's minutia, is it the feet first or the meters first? Or is it the dot over 90? There's so many little details that we can get obsessed about. Or what's the serial number and the production date? And half of that year, these watches had this feature, but then the other half, sorry, I'm choking myself up, guys. The other half of the year, they had this feature, right? We can get really obsessed about the knowledge base and the knowledge acquisition. And I think that that's what attracts so many of us to the hobby, is that there's this endless pool, these endless resources for being informed, for researching and being knowledgeable. But to me, that means that we're probably natural intellectuals, that a lot of us approach the world and the lives we live in a similar fashion. It's not just watches that we can turn that hyperdrive engine on when it comes to the intellectual capacity, and intellectual, just the knowledge gaining. So I think that that's partly what's unique about this hobby, is that it is knowledge seeking. It can be about learning and knowledge seeking. But what's unique is that that's also paired with consumerism. So it's not just that it's in and of itself, the research. You do the research and you do learn about these obscure references and stuff, but there is still a material consumer component to it, where at the end of the day, all of that knowledge is typically gearing up for a purchase. Even if it's not conscious to you yet, that's how people say they have grail pieces or this or that. It's because you eventually would aspire to buying it. Very few of us can just absorb the information and the knowledge and never, ever purchase a watch. We're buying watches, even if it's not the watches that we're researching, because there is a material consumer side to it. So I think that's what makes it tricky, is those two things get blurred so often, the consumerism and the material acquisition, and that thirst for knowledge and information and learning. And those two things get fused together, and then it just becomes this really tough cycle that can interfere with contentment. It's hard to be content when there's always more to learn and always more to have, right? I think that's what it is for me. It's very hard to be content. I always feel unsettled and it's unfinished, because collecting is by its nature going to feel unfinished. There's always more to learn, and potentially there's always more to have. So I think that that's what's really troubling or really underwriting the contentment or the lack of contentment in watch collecting, that makes us continually seek. And of course, there's so much information and so many platforms and, videos and blogs and books for days, that you could continue to be in that cycle of knowledge acquisition that ultimately leads to either a desire for the material object, or actually purchasing the material object. And when we can't purchase it because it's not available, or because we can't afford it, or because whatever, then I think there is that frustration, which again gets in the way of contentment. So that was my big revelation today, guys, about why am I restless about the hobby? That this is crazy, that the hobby is kind of making me not happy. Because I feel a little sense of discontentment about it. And it actually, I'm aware that it's more anxiousness than enjoyment at times. So I wanted to just say that, because that's how I'm thinking about the watch contentment thing. Please share your thoughts on whether you have achieved and can maintain watch contentment. But what I wanted to offer were some solutions, because I'm a solution-based person, and I'm trying to figure out what works for me in controlling this drive, and trying to reach some semblance of contentment, trying to maintain that. So I think there are some hacks for this. One is, because of the knowledge-based side of things, because it is about knowledge acquisition and learning, and we're probably intellectual people. So one thing is dive into something that is also intellectually stimulating to you, something that is fascinating. But the catch is that it can't have a material outcome. Try to dive into something that does not really allow you to purchase it. So for example, I kind of have gotten into aviation history recently, and I love learning about planes. I'm not going to go buy a plane. I'm just not. That's not an aspiration. I may kind of crave getting my pilot's license. I don't know. That seems a little bit out there. But I just love learning about planes, and I love learning about aviation history, and I love the air traffic control, transcripts and channels, and there's a whole community around that stuff. It's kind of quirky, but basically there's no real threat of me purchasing a plane or buying anything. I'm just learning about it because I find it fascinating. That's just one example. I'm sure a lot of us have other hobbies and other interests, but sometimes those other hobbies and other interests do also lead to material acquisitions, which I think could be the same road as the watch collecting, like discontentment or, malcontentment, whatever. So I think that having a hobby that allows you to dive deep whether it's a hobby or just a momentary interest, let something that lets you dive deep that doesn't also lead to consumerism. So that might be one hack. Number two is the old standby that I keep saying I'm going to do and haven't really done. And that is disconnect from social media. If you spend a week away from the watch community, 2 weeks, a month away, I guarantee you will start to feel more content because you're not hearing the constant chatter and seeing the constant acquisitions and just the rhythm of the community that fuels the knowledge and the knowledge acquisition and the material acquisition. But if you disconnect and delete YouTube, delete the apps like Instagram and Discord, if you delete a lot of that from your devices for a set period of time, I think you can calm it down. And meanwhile, get into something else for a little while that allows you to satisfy that intellectual edge and curiosity. So that's really hard to do because a lot of us are in this space because we also enjoy the social side of it. So you would also be disconnecting from some of your communities, and that is what it is. So the third thing I can think of, which is very huge to me, is read. And this is why I have these random novels here. I noticed that I read a lot less as an adult for pleasure. I read because of my job, but I read a lot less for pleasure, like novels and just low stake things, a lot less because of my consumption of technology. And I would describe myself as an avid reader, especially as a child growing up, through most of my formative years. I've always been an avid reader of lots of different material. However, because of my consumption of social media, primarily around watches, I tend to read significantly less. And in fact, I think it's even hard to focus on a novel, get into the world. This is an example of some science fiction, some young adult science fiction, guys. So we're not even talking difficult stuff. This novel, this is a novella. This is like 90 pages. And it took me forever to even pick this up and want to read it. And then this is one I just started. And it's like, these are other worlds. I like the special powers and all of that, the weird stuff. But to get into somebody else's world, you have to give it some time to their imaginative space. And if you're all twitchy because you're having some social media withdrawals, I do think it's a lot harder to read. But I think that reading, I've recently finished a few novels, and I noticed I was not on YouTube, I was not on Instagram, I was not obsessing about watches. I was actually wearing the Submariner, and every time I would turn a page, I would actually get a glimpse of the sub, and I was like, hey, no date sub, you looking pretty good. I was enjoying the watch and feeling content, but not obsessing. So I do think for me, and maybe for you, pick out something to read and really force yourself to sit with it and shut down everything else and just read. If you have to be obsessive and binge read and set a goal for yourself, look, it's 30 days. In 30 days, I want to read 15 novels. Let's go. I do think that that helps because your mind is not only distracted, you're in a whole another world. You're not in a literal space when you're reading a novel. So for some reason, that does work from the neuroplasticity side of things, I think. That does sort of rechannel and rewire some of that energy that we can devote to the hobby that ultimately I think is unproductive. So yeah, reading. And it's just a matter of making myself continue to do it because I do think that that's very helpful. The final thing I want to say, I'm having some sparkly water here. It's hot outside, guys. It's like 90. The final thing I want to say about watch collecting contentment, is it achievable? Can you do it? What does that even feel like? Do we really want it? I do, guys. I do. I really, really do. And so it's a battle. I really got to struggle to focus on that and not get so caught up in, the highs and lows of the hobby of collecting and of the, like I said, the material side and the intellectual side. So I think the final thing that was really an eye-opener to me when I was going for a walk with the dogs today, it is this. Here's my deep metaphysical revelation. I think you have to get to the root cause of your overall imbalance and discontentment. So yeah, I feel anxious and I feel like, man, and if I could just get, the Kermit from my AD, or why won't he sell me a Daytona? If I could just, calm that down for a minute, I actually have to see, is there something else that I'm really not content about that is driving my focus on the hobby so much? So, like, I'll give you a good example, which I know is my problem right now, and that is my working life. I work a lot of hours and I have a job that is basically always on the clock, that no matter the season, I'm supposed to be working, and it is the right career for me and I like my job, etc. But I have a lot of responsibilities and a lot of time when I really need to be working on projects, a lot of unstructured time. That usually builds some kind of resentment, lack of contentment, right, around the working life and how I'm managing or not managing it. And I know that watches have become a space, especially during COVID, where I could decompress from stress and I could decompress from the obvious challenges of the world, including my working life. But I think the problem is that decompressing activity got way out of balance and is still really out of balance, when the root problem to me is just, am I paying attention to how I'm working in my work life? Am I paying attention to what is out of whack there? How can I make it more moderate? How can I make it more enjoyable, because I do enjoy the work, and still have space for resting, recovery that is not compulsive, watch hobby stuff. So I think that that's the big revelation that I'm going to be working on, is just addressing the other aspects of my life that I feel discontent about. And that's the real deal. When those things are being addressed, the watching, collecting, obsessiveness calms down, and then I can just enjoy the damn things. It's not about those things at the end of the day. And the other things I mentioned, like dive into something else intellectually, read, disconnect, those are just strategies. But the real root cause of the lack of contentment and the overdrive on the watch collecting side, I think, don't quote me on this, I'm not a therapist. That is not my job. I think has to do with, is something else out of balance? What am I avoiding? What am I dreading? What is making me stressed out? And then I'm pushing that aside and running over into the watches hardcore. So yeah, that was a big revelation I just wanted to share with the watch community. Maybe you've already figured this stuff out for yourself. Maybe it doesn't bother you as much, but it is starting to bother me. My wife and I were having a great conversation last night, and she always says we should be recording this for your channel when we have these deep conversations. And I was mad, guys. I'm gonna make a video about my last trip to the Rolex AD. Which was not a bad trip. We bought a watch. How did I not mention that? We bought a watch. It's my wife's watch, and I'll introduce it. It's on our Instagram, so it's not really that huge of a surprise. But we bought a watch, and I had an experience with the Rolex AD, and I was mad about it. I had some feels, guys, some new feels about Rolex and the AD and just this whole thing. And I had to really think about, why is this bothering me so much? My life is amazing. I stayed healthy during COVID, even though I gained that pandemic weight. I'm taking it off again. It's my favorite season of the year. Why on earth am I all frowned up and stuff about a watch, the next possible acquisition? What the heck is going on? So my wife and I were having this conversation, and that's how I came to some of these revelations. I need to read more. I need to dive into the things that stimulate me intellectually, but also I really need to put into balance, fix the things that are out of whack in other aspects of my life, because I think that makes contentment in the collecting more possible. Let me know what you think, guys. What are your strategies? Do you find this to be a problem at all? Is it an attainable thing to feel like, yes, I have contentment, I truly am enjoying it? I mean, I see people have contentment or say they have contentment, and it's very, very brief. And I mean, Jeff McMahon is a guy who I watch his channel a lot. He gets into a lot of these similar topics about collecting and addiction and what is really driving us. And I would say that I think he and I are definitely similar in some ways. And, you know, we're all different, so we have our own spin on it. And for me, this is it. I know that there are 1 or 2 areas of my life that are stressing me out, and I cannot feel contentment in my collecting until I deal with those issues. In fact, those issues exacerbate the hobby for me. And actually, I'm gonna go as far as saying those things being out of balance kind of pollute and ruin the hobby. Okay, here, I'm on my high horse right now. Let me get my water, my ice. Sorry about that. It's not flippers, it's not ADs that are ruining the hobby for us, all of us impassioned enthusiasts. It's probably us. We're ruining the hobby for us. Is that possible, guys? We're the ones with the kind of energy that we bring to the table that is not always great. You know, it's some anxious, funky, you know, really, really complex things that we're bringing to the space that also make the collecting side of things, you know, not great. It can be compulsive. And so for me, that was a huge revelation, that I'm bringing this energy to the table. I'm standing in my way of enjoying the collection. And it really doesn't have to do with watches at all. It has to do with other areas of my life. So let me know what you think, guys. Peace. I got to take my dog to the vet, get his little, what is it? Heartworm medication, whatever, heart guard, before they close. So I'm just trying to squeeze this video in here right now, and I'll talk to you soon.